I'm Eliza. I'm 31, and my stepfather blamed me for his affair until I played his confession at the family reunion. If you've ever experienced something like this, comment below and subscribe. You're not alone. I've heard people say that betrayal from strangers stings, but betrayal from family? That buries itself under your skin, nestles deep into your bones, and sits there, poisoning everything. You can pretend you're fine, you can smile, show up for dinner, laugh at the right moments, but inside, you're rotting. And that rot started for me on the day I heard my stepfather laugh about blaming me for his affair. Let me start from the beginning. I grew up in Stillwater, Minnesota, a picturesque little town that's basically a Hallmark movie in real life. Red brick storefronts, 4th of July parades, and gossip that travels faster than a sneeze in church. My mom, Eleanor, was a school counselor. Calm, elegant, the type of woman who always smelled like lavender and somehow made everyone feel like their feelings were valid. My dad, Charles, was a carpenter with calloused hands and a big laugh that you could hear 3 blocks down. He died in a boating accident when I was 8. They said he was fishing with a friend when a storm came in too fast. The boat capsized. His friend made it. My dad didn't. I don't remember the funeral, but I remember Mom stopped wearing perfume after that. I remember the silence in our house stretching so wide it felt like an ocean. And I remember when Richard came in to fill that space. He was the father of one of Mom's students, a widower, smooth-talking, always offering help. Let me fix that cabinet for you, Eleanor. Why don't I take Eliza to school while you catch your breath? He was persistent, and Mom, broken, tired, vulnerable, eventually said yes. I was 13 when they married. And at first, I thought it would be okay. Richard brought flowers, made pancakes shaped like animals, and tried too hard to be cool. He'd toss me the remote and say, "You pick the movie, kiddo." I wanted so badly to believe he cared, but even at 13, I could feel something was off. He'd call me pretty, not in the way your dad is supposed to. He'd put his hand on my back and let it linger just a second too long. He'd sit a little too close on the couch. When I told Mom I didn't like it, that it made my skin crawl, she waved me off. "You're a teenager," she said. "Everything annoys you right now. Richard's just trying." So I stopped trying. I pulled away. I kept my door locked at night. I wore baggy clothes when he was home. I learned to smile through gritted teeth and say, "Thanks, Richard," when he gave me gifts. I counted the days until I could leave for college. And when I finally did a full-ride scholarship to the University of Minnesota, I barely looked back. I visited only when I had to. Holidays, birthdays, guilt-tripped weekends. And every time, Richard played the part of the charming stepdad, cracking dad jokes and offering wine like we were old friends. And every time, I felt like a child again, suffocating in a house that had never truly been mine after my dad died. Mom never saw it. Or maybe she didn't want to. Last year, I took a sabbatical from work. I'm a social worker, which basically means I carry other people's trauma like suitcases while juggling my own in silence. I was burned out, brittle, angry, running on fumes. Mom called one night and said, "Why don't you come stay for a few weeks? Help me plan my 60th birthday party. We'll make it fun. Just us girls." I should have said no, but something in her voice, maybe loneliness, maybe hope, made me say yes. I drove home in early May. The backyard was still thawing out from winter, the tulips just starting to bloom. Mom had spreadsheets for the party, lists of guests, menus printed out, ideas for music and decorations. She was excited in a way I hadn't seen in years, and I wanted to be there for her. I really did. And then there was Richard, still wearing his cologne that made my stomach turn. Still calling me kiddo. Still acting like nothing had ever happened. I avoided him like a profession. When he walked into a room, I walked out. When he offered help, I declined. I stayed busy with party errands, grocery runs, coordinating with caterers. It worked, mostly, until the day I heard him through the vent. It was a Tuesday. I was in the kitchen, surrounded by receipts and planning documents. I had my laptop open, Spotify playing softly. I was trying to finalize the caterer when I heard a voice drift down through the vent above the fridge. Did AT first. I didn't pay attention. The house has old vents. They carry sound from upstairs if someone's in the office above. But then I heard Richard's voice. She's staying in the guest room next to ours. It's weird. It's hard to sleep. My blood froze. Then came another voice. A woman's. Low, amused. I told you this would get complicated, Rick. He laughed. That ugly, satisfied kind of laugh. I can't keep sneaking around forever. But if I tell Eleanor now, she'll blame Eliza. She's always so damn protective of her. The woman's voice turned mocking. You'd let your wife believe your stepdaughter came onto you? I'm not making her believe anything, he said. I'm just giving her a story she already half believes. I stood there, in my mother's kitchen, fingers digging into the edge of the counter. And I realized this wasn't new. This was a narrative he'd been spinning for years. That I was the problem. That I was dramatic. That I'd misread things. That he was the victim of a moody teenager who never accepted him, and Mom believed it. The next day I left, I told her I needed to go back to Minneapolis for work. I lied and said I had a case emergency. I packed quietly, hugged her longer than I should have, and drove straight to a tech store in the city. I bought a voice recorder. Small, sleek, high memory capacity. I hid it inside a decorative candle, the kind that sat unused on the fireplace mantel. I drove back to Stillwater the following week with one mission: record him. Get the truth. And use it. The family reunion was in 2 months. A big affair. The first time in years our extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, would all be under one roof. It was supposed to be part of Mom's birthday weekend. A celebration. I was going to turn it into a reckoning. The day I came back to Stillwater with the voice recorder hidden in my overnight bag, the town looked exactly the same. Soft spring sunlight casting shadows on maple-lined streets. Kids biking in packs near the lake, old folks waving from porch swings. Everything seemed untouched by the storm that was building inside me. I pulled into my mother's driveway just after sunset, heart hammering. I didn't expect to feel so nauseous. The truth was, part of me still wanted to be wrong. Still wanted to believe I had misheard or misunderstood, because if I was right, it meant my entire life, my entire family, was built on a foundation of manipulation and cowardice. Mom greeted me at the door in her gardening gloves, cheeks flushed. A smear of dirt across her forehead. Eliza. Oh, I'm so glad you're back, she said, pulling me into a tight hug that made me want to cry. The peonies are blooming early this year. I think it's a sign. I smiled, burying my horror. Maybe it means your party will be perfect. Richard appeared behind her, casual in cargo shorts and a smug smile. Hey, kiddo. It took everything in me not to flinch. The guest room was the same, pale yellow walls, floral curtains, my high school bookshelf still half full with worn copies of Jane Eyre and The Bell Jar. I set my bag down, locked the door behind me, and took out the recorder. I'd pre-programmed it to start recording every day between 8 p.m. and 3 a.m., the time range when Richard usually made his phone calls and had his private chats in the upstairs office. I tested the volume, tested the battery, slid it into the hollow of the unused candle on the fireplace mantel in the living room. The next step was patience. I spent the week pretending everything was fine. I helped Mom finalize her guest list, 47 confirmed, including relatives flying in from Oregon and Florida. I ordered centerpieces. I edited the family slideshow for the projector. I even agreed to cook with Richard one evening when Mom was out with her sister, just to play the part. He was charming, of course. Played jazz on the speaker, poured me a glass of wine, told stories from his law firm like he wasn't a predator wearing a mask. At one point, he leaned against the kitchen island and said, "You've really grown into yourself, Eliza. I always knew you'd be special." I didn't respond. I just stirred the sauce. Every night, after everyone had gone to bed, I slipped into the living room and retrieved the recorder. Every morning, I reviewed the audio files on my laptop. For 4 nights, there was nothing but silence, footsteps, occasional creaks. Then came Friday. I sat cross-legged on my bed, earbuds in, and nearly dropped the laptop when I heard his voice. He was on the phone again. Same woman. Low, husky voice. They were talking about the reunion. About my mother. She's already suspicious, the woman said. Are you sure you can spin it? She won't ask, Richard replied. She's never asked. And if she does, I'll say it was Eliza again. That she's always hated our marriage. A pause. Then, it's not even a full lie. The woman laughed. You really are shameless. I'm a lawyer, he replied. I know how people think. If I'm calm and sad enough, she'll believe I tried to make it work. You going to do it soon? After the reunion. I want the house in my name first. I had to pause the file. My hands were shaking. I felt like I was hearing the earth split open beneath me. He wasn't just cheating. He was preparing to divorce my mother, lie to her face, and take the house, the same house my dad had paid for before his death. The house where we built our lives. I stayed up the entire night listening, rewinding, documenting, saving copies to a cloud drive, a backup hard drive, and a secure folder on my phone. I wasn't just angry. I was incandescent with fury, but I wasn't going to confront him yet. Not directly, because the reunion was a week away. And that night, I made a decision. I was going to destroy Richard in front of the entire family, using only the truth. The next morning, I asked Mom if I could help with the tech stuff for the party, slideshows, music, the microphone setup. She smiled, grateful. That would be amazing, sweetie. You've always been the organized one. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth. Over the next week, I worked like an event planner on Adderall. I arranged the projector screen to be placed behind the dining area, front and center. I made playlists of family favorites sprinkled with nostalgic hits. I even offered to MC part of the evening. You, the shy one. Mom teased, just a little speech, I said. For your milestone birthday. She beamed. Richard, meanwhile, was getting bolder. He made comments about me not needing to be single forever, asked what I wore to bed on hot nights, stood just a little too close when we were alone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slap the smugness off his face. But I didn't, because I had something better. By the day of the reunion, I had everything loaded. The slideshow, the music, the audio. All I needed was the moment. The backyard looked magical that evening, round tables with white linens, fairy lights strung along the trees, wine glasses catching the fading sunlight. Mom wore a lilac dress and looked 15 years younger. She was glowing. Guests hugged her, kissed her cheek, gave long toasts about what a wonderful, patient, loving woman she was. I stayed mostly silent. Watching AT around 8:30, as dinner was winding down, I stood up and tapped the microphone. Conversations quieted. Someone turned off the music. My mother looked surprised and touched. I smiled at her. Before we do cake, I just wanted to say a few words. She reached for Richard's hand. Growing up, I always thought families were invincible. I began, my voice calm, measured. I thought people who smiled at each other every day must be telling the truth. But I've learned something very different in the past few months. The air tensed slightly. I gestured to the projector. The slideshow began, photos of Mom as a child, then with my dad, then pictures from my childhood. A few soft laughs. My mother wiped a tear, then came the audio. No visuals. Just black screen. Just sound. Richard's voice filled the backyard. She's staying in the guest room next to ours. It's weird. It's hard to sleep. Gasps. People turned toward each other. Then the woman's voice. I told you this would get complicated, Rick. The audio continued. His plans. His lies. The mention of blaming me. Of taking the house. Of doing it after the reunion. When it ended, there was dead silence. Mom stood slowly, her face pale. Richard was frozen, mouth slightly open. Across the table, Aunt Marlene was crying. My cousin Zach stood up and muttered, "What the hell?" I took a breath. That was recorded in this house. 2 weeks ago. I didn't edit it. I didn't fabricate anything. I just wanted my mother to know the truth. Mom stared at Richard. Is it true? She asked. Her voice smalled. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Eleanor, she's twisting. I asked you a question, she said. Her tone had changed. It was low, hard. He didn't answer. She turned to me, tears in her eyes. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I tried, I said softly. When I was 17. You didn't want to hear it then. I just wanted you to see it now. She reached for me, hugged me, and then she looked back at him, the man who had built his entire life on lies and smug manipulation, and said, "Get out of my house." For a moment after my mother told Richard to leave, the entire backyard was silent, the kind of silence that feels like it has weight. Like the air itself has frozen in place, waiting for something to snap. Everyone sat in stunned stillness under the fairy lights, their wine glasses untouched, their mouths slack with disbelief. Even the cicadas had gone quiet, and then Richard laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the air like a slap. It wasn't real laughter. It was the kind of noise people make when they're caught red-handed and still think they can bluff their way out. You're not serious, Eleanor, he said, looking around the backyard like it was a courtroom and he was about to cross-examine a witness. This is some kind of prank, right? You think you can throw away 30 years of marriage because of an audio recording? Come on. My mother stood still, her back straight, her face pale but composed. I hadn't seen her like this in years. She'd always been gentle, diplomatic, the peacemaker at every holiday. But now she looked like steel wrapped in skin. I told you to leave. Richard, she repeated. I don't want to hear another word from you tonight. But he wasn't finished. Of course not. Richard was the kind of man who always needed the last word. He gestured wildly, trying to pull the family into his performance. Really? No one's going to say anything? You're all going to believe her over me. He pointed directly at me. I didn't flinch. She's always hated me, he said, voice rising. Ever since I married her mother. She's been poisoning Eleanor against me for years, planting little seeds of doubt, spinning stories. My Aunt Marlene stood up. Then why were you talking about taking the house and blaming Eliza? Richard paused. Just long enough for the rest of the guests to start shifting in their seats. Cousin Zach crossed his arms. We heard what we heard, man. You sounded pretty comfortable with it. She manipulated me. Richard shouted, eyes wild now. She baited me. She's obsessed with tearing this family apart. What kind of daughter records private conversations? She's the kind of daughter who had to protect her mother. Someone murmured from the back, why mother finally moved. She stepped between Richard and me, as if shielding me from him for the first time in my life. Her voice was quiet but firm. You're done, Richard. Go pack a bag. You're not sleeping here tonight. He looked at her like he didn't recognize her. Like the meek woman he'd controlled for decades had been swapped out for someone entirely new. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low. I already do, she replied. Richard turned and walked into the house. I heard the back door slam behind him. A few seconds passed. Then someone clapped. Just one. Then another joined. And before I knew it, the backyard was echoing with a slow, awkward, but genuine round of applause. My face flushed. I hadn't expected that. I hadn't wanted it. This wasn't supposed to be a public takedown. It was supposed to be truth. But in the absence of a better response, my family did the only thing they knew how to do. They showed solidarity. Mom turned to me, eyes glassy. You should have told me about him back then, she said softly. I did, I said. You didn't want to believe me. She nodded slowly. You're right. I didn't. She reached out and held my hand. I'm so sorry. I wasn't ready to forgive her, not yet. But that moment was the first real thing we'd had in years. The reunion didn't recover. People tried to pretend, to change the subject, to turn the music back on, to slice the cake and smile, but the spell was broken. Aunts packed up early. Cousins offered awkward hugs. And eventually, the backyard was just me and Mom, sitting in the dark with the half-eaten cake and paper lanterns flickering in the wind. Where is he now? I asked, she sighed. Probably upstairs. I'll call a locksmith in the morning. You sure you're okay? No, she said honestly. But I'm going to be. I drove back to Minneapolis that night, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. My phone buzzed with messages all the way, some from family, thanking me for the truth, others from Richard himself. They started with threats. You'll regret humiliating me. Defamation is a crime, Eliza. Then they turned pitiful. You misunderstood. It was all a fantasy, nothing happened. And then, finally, pathetic. Please. Don't destroy me. I blocked him. But the fallout wasn't over. The next few weeks were chaos. Mom called a divorce attorney. Richard tried to stop her by pretending he had early-stage dementia. When that didn't work, he accused me of manipulating him with doctored audio. I sent the attorney all 6 files, including the original metadata timestamps. That shut him up fast, but the worst was what came next. When Mom started blaming herself, I should have listened to you, she said over coffee one morning. All those years, what kind of mother doesn't protect her daughter? I didn't know how to answer that. So I told her the truth. You were grieving. And you were lonely. He saw that and used it. She nodded. And I let him. She'd been seeing a therapist since the reunion, and it showed. For the first time in decades, she was letting herself feel the full weight of what she'd ignored. She started journaling, volunteering, painting again, and yet, I couldn't shake the bitterness. Because what Richard had done to me wasn't just about manipulation. It was about erasure. For years, he made me feel like I was the problem. He twisted my discomfort into teenage drama, turned my silence into complicity, and almost convinced me that my instincts were wrong. Worse, he made my mother complicit by convincing her to look the other way, and the world still didn't care. A man like Richard would find another woman to charm, another life to insert himself into, another way to rewrite the truth. That realization kept me up at night. Then, one day, Mom called me from her lawyer's office. Her voice sounded different. I have an idea, she said. But I need your help. The next part of our plan wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring that he couldn't do it again. Not to another woman. Not to another family. We gathered everything, the recordings, the texts, the timeline. Mom had found documents showing Richard was already setting up a private bank account, slowly funneling money from their joint retirement fund. His lawyer tried to paint it as standard marital independence, but the numbers told a different story. We filed an affidavit. We submitted the evidence. And when Richard tried to fight it in court, the judge listened to the tapes. He lost everything: the house, the pension share, the community goodwill. Mom got everything she deserved, and Richard? He slinked out of town, reportedly moving in with his sister 2 states over. That should have been the end, but it wasn't, because then his daughter from his first marriage messaged me. She'd seen my name in a Facebook comment thread. She said, I think we need to talk. Her name was Kara, 35, lived in Milwaukee. And when I met her in person 2 weeks later, she told me the story of her childhood, the creepy way Richard treated her, the way he pit her against her mother, the way no one believed her either. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. Our coffees untouched. I always thought I was just crazy, Kara said. Until I heard your story. You weren't crazy, I said. You were cornered. We cried. Then we made a decision. If Richard wanted to rewrite history, we were going to publish the truth. Together, Kara and I didn't intend to go public at first. It wasn't about vengeance, not really. It was about visibility. About reclaiming a truth that had been buried under decades of manipulation and silence. About lighting a flare in case there were others out there with similar wounds, still doubting themselves in the dark. IT started small. We opened a private group online, specifically for women who had experienced familial grooming or covert abuse. We weren't therapists or experts, but we knew pain intimately, and we knew how to listen without flinching. Within 2 weeks, the group had over 300 members. Within a month, Nearly 1,000. Kara ran the admin side, building guidelines, vetting requests to join, organizing community check-ins. I handled the storytelling. I wrote long, detailed posts about Richard, about the way he weaponized language, about how he laughed when I caught him in his own lies, about the chilling moment I realized he was already preparing to gaslight my mother into believing I had seduced him. Each post struck a nerve. We received messages daily from people who'd gone through the same thing, different names, different homes, different faces, but the same script. The charming stepfather, the oversensitive daughter, the harmless flirting, the "you're overreacting." The family gatherings where the abuser smiled in front of everyone and then brushed past your body in the hallway, leaving your stomach in knots while you forced a laugh. I learned that what happened to me wasn't rare, it was common. That broke something in me and built something new. 2 months after the family reunion, Kara and I wrote a joint op-ed. It was published in a popular online women's magazine under the title, "When the Villain is Wearing Dad's Tie, Daughters of Domestic Manipulators Speak Out." We didn't use Richard's full name, but anyone who knew us knew who it was about. The piece went viral within 72 hours. Thousands of shares. Hundreds of comments. Some hateful, of course. The internet never disappoints, but most were supportive. People wrote things like, "Reading this was like watching my life on paper." My stepdad did the same. I never had the courage to say it out loud. Thank you. You validated something I've spent 20 years trying to bury. Our inbox overflowed. News outlets reached out. Podcasts asked us to speak. And slowly, people stopped saying, "Are you sure?" and started saying, "I believe you." Meanwhile, back in Stillwater, Richard was unraveling. Mom told me he'd tried to file a restraining order against both of us, claiming defamation and character assassination. The judge threw it out. His lawyer dropped him. The house deed was officially transferred. His name was removed from every account. He still sent emails now and then, long, unhinged paragraphs full of self-pity and blame. I never responded. Neither did Kara. It killed him. You could feel it in the tone of his desperation. He couldn't stand not having the last word, but this wasn't his story anymore. This was mine, and I wasn't finished. I started looking into his past, not just his divorce from Kara's mom, but his early years. I found old court records buried in archives, subtle red flags that were dismissed as misunderstandings at the time. I found complaints from his former secretary at the law firm he used to work at. She'd filed an HR report in 2004 that vanished mysteriously after 3 days. I emailed her. She replied, "I still remember how he looked at me," she wrote. Like I was a chew toy he couldn't wait to ruin. She had moved on, started a bakery in Oregon, remarried. But the damage had lingered. She'd been afraid to speak out back then. She wasn't anymore. We added her story, anonymously, with her consent, to the group. And then others began sharing similar accounts. Within 3 months, we had enough documented patterns to see what Richard really was. Not just a bad stepfather or a failed husband. He was a serial predator. And he'd use charm like a weapon. When Mom saw the mosaic we'd built, all these women, strangers to each other, telling the same story, she wept. She cried not just for herself, but for all the women like her who had ignored their instincts because they'd been taught that love meant forgiveness. That doubt was disloyalty. That suspicion was just ungratefulness in disguise. She wasn't the only one who began to reevaluate things. Aunt Marlene called me 2 weeks later and confessed something that made my blood run cold. "When you were in high school," she said, "Richard used to flirt with me. I thought it was harmless. I thought maybe I imagined it. But one time, when we were clearing the table after Christmas dinner, he said, 'If I'd met you before Eleanor, I'd have ruined you too.'" I was silent. I laughed it off, she said. God help me, I laughed. Because the idea of taking it seriously felt ridiculous. He was your stepfather. Your mom's husband. I told myself he was joking. "Do you think Mom ever suspected?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time. "I think your mom made a choice. A quiet one. To survive. And in her mind, surviving meant not knowing. It was the most honest thing anyone had said about my mother, because I had seen her shrink so many times, not physically, but emotionally. I had seen her change the subject when things got uncomfortable. I had seen her smile at church when someone praised Richard's generosity. I had watched her accept gaslighting like it was a love language. Survival wasn't about thriving for her. It was about staying upright. Until now, the biggest change in her came gradually, not in dramatic declarations, but in small actions. She sold the house. She cut ties with Richard's extended family. She took a trip to Scotland alone. Something she'd talked about for decades but never done, and she started therapy. Real therapy. Not just the talk about your weak kind, but deep, gut-level work with a trauma-informed counselor. "You're stronger than you think," I told her. She smiled. "I'm starting to believe it." Meanwhile, Kara and I were contacted by a small production company. They wanted to adapt our story, or at least parts of it, into a documentary short. We were hesitant at first. The thought of reliving everything on camera was daunting. But when we met the producer, a woman named Angela who had her own history with abuse, we said yes. Filming took 3 months. They interviewed us separately and together. They interviewed Mom. They used voice actors for the recordings, recreated scenes using shadows and animation so no real names had to be shown. The final cut was called The Quiet Daughter. It aired online first, and then at a local film festival, and that's where something unexpected happened. After the screening, a woman approached me in the lobby. She looked to be in her 60s, tall, elegant, the kind of woman you expect to be formidable. She introduced herself as Margaret, Richard's ex-fiancé before he met my mother. "I knew what he was," she said quietly. But I didn't have the words back then. She handed me a letter. "He did to me what he did to you. But worse." I took it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she said, "for finishing what I never could." That night, back in my apartment, I opened the letter. It was detailed. Specific. Chilling. She'd left him a week before their wedding because she found photos on his old computer, not of anything illegal, but of women he'd dated, cataloged like trophies. Notes about their weaknesses. Marginalia, like cried when criticized, effective during arguments, and isolated from friends, maintain control. It was a journal of strategic emotional abuse. She'd left without looking back, never told anyone, convinced it was just a weird phase he'd grown out of, but it wasn't a phase. It was a blueprint. I forwarded the letter to my mom. She sent back one line, "I never want to say his name again." I understood. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about the space he used to occupy, the silence he used to fill, the damage he used to hide behind a smile, and now that space belonged to USDT, the women who refused to stay quiet, the daughters who stood in the fire and came out burning brighter. It's strange how healing doesn't arrive all at once, like a sunrise. It creeps in quietly, like light through a cracked door, filtering through in odd moments, a morning where your chest doesn't feel tight, an evening where you laugh without it catching in your throat, a conversation with your mother that feels honest, without resentment lurking underneath. I end the aftermath of Richard's public unmasking and his subsequent fall from grace. My world didn't magically transform. There were no parades, no internal fireworks. But there was something else. Silence. Peaceful silence. And into that silence, I began to rebuild. For the first time in over a decade, I visited my father's grave. It had taken me years to go back. I don't know if it was guilt for not remembering him more clearly, or fear that standing in front of his tombstone would make me feel the weight of all the years we'd lost. But I needed to see him now. To say something out loud I never had before, I brought a coffee. His favorite. I sat on the bench near the big willow tree in Stillwater Cemetery and stared at the simple stone. Charles Morgan, 1959 to 1997. "Beloved husband and father, I'm sorry," I whispered, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I had survived so much he never got to see. "You would have hated him," I said. "Richard. He talked a good game, but you would have seen through it. I wish you'd been here. I wish you'd been the one to walk me down the aisle someday." I wish. Everything. The wind moved through the willow tree. A leaf fluttered down and landed beside me. I closed my eyes, and in that moment I let myself believe, just for a breath, that he heard me. Back home in Minneapolis, life resumed in its quiet, strange new way, and why social work sabbatical turned into something longer. I started working part-time for a nonprofit that specialized in trauma-informed education. Less burnout, more purpose. I spoke on panels. I helped develop workshops. I even consulted for a small police department on how to better support victims of domestic manipulation. People began to recognize me. Not for fame, there was no real glamour in what I'd done, but for courage. And it felt strange, because I didn't feel brave. I felt tired, honest, worn thin, but maybe that was what courage really looked like. Kara and I were closer than ever. Sisters not by blood, but by survival. We had a rhythm now, morning check-ins, coffee over Zoom, planning advocacy projects together. She'd moved to Minneapolis part-time and was staying in an Airbnb not far from my place. Feels weird not having a real family anymore, she said one afternoon as we walked along the river. You have one, I replied. You have me. She smiled, tears in her eyes. You're the first person who ever said that and meant it. We decided to launch a nonprofit of our own, something grassroots, community-based, focused on prevention. Not just helping survivors after the fact, but catching the red flags earlier, giving girls and women the vocabulary to name what was happening to them while it was still happening. We called it Daughter's Voice. Simple. Direct. Ours. The first thing we did was create a storytelling archive, a digital safe haven for people to submit their experiences anonymously. We had volunteer therapists moderating submissions, resources at the bottom of every page, and a message board where people could talk freely without shame. The submissions poured in. Some were 2 lines. Others were pages long. Some came from women in their 60s who had never told a soul. Some came from teenagers, typing from bedrooms in homes that still didn't feel safe. Reading them was brutal, but necessary, and it reminded me, again and again, that this wasn't just my story. This was a pattern point, one that thrived in silence. In secrecy. In the belief that people like Richard were respected, established, and trusted. Until we pulled back the curtain. Meanwhile, back in Stillwater, my mother was undergoing her own transformation. After the documentary aired and the op-ed went viral, she became something of a quiet icon in the town. Women who had once pitied her now reached out with their own stories. Church ladies brought her pies and casseroles, the universal language of Midwest forgiveness. But Mom didn't want pity, she wanted changed. She did something I never expected. She ran for the local school board, not because she wanted power, but because she wanted policy. I spent too long thinking not my business, she told me. But it was always my business. It's everyone's business. These kids need to know their instincts matter. She proposed mandatory training for teachers on how to spot grooming behaviors. She advocated for age-appropriate education on boundaries and consent, starting in elementary school. She stood up at meetings and told parts of our story, not for applause, but for impact. She won in a landslide. I stood beside her on election night, holding her hand as her name was announced. She wasn't the same woman I had grown up with. She was fiercer, softer, braver. After the celebration, she leaned in and whispered, "I hope your dad would be proud." He would, I said, because he would have. No question. And then came the final shift point, one I didn't see coming. About 6 months after the reunion, I got an email from Richard's sister, Barbara. It was short, cold, but clear. He's moved to Michigan. He's living off his savings. We don't speak anymore. I just wanted you to know. You did the right thing. I stared at the message for a long time, and then I deleted it because I didn't need validation from the family that once defended him. I didn't need to know where he was or how he was scraping by. That part of my life was done. Irrelevant. But what I did need, what I still crave some nights, was the peace of knowing that no one else would fall for his smile again. Kara and I received news a few months later that sealed everything. The State Bar Association had officially revoked Richard's legal license. The complaint was submitted anonymously, but it came with detailed documentation, enough to prove that his ethics violations weren't just personal, they were professional. His name was removed from the state website. His law career, once polished and pristine, was now a footnote. A cautionary tale that I didn't celebrate. Not outwardly, but that night I poured a glass of wine, stood on my balcony, and whispered one word into the night sky. Done. Because it was, he didn't destroy us, he exposed himself. All I did was stop playing along. By the time our nonprofit, Daughter's Voice, reached its 6-month anniversary, the website had recorded over 10,000 unique visits, and more than 1,400 stories had been submitted. I found myself alternating between awe and exhaustion, sitting in front of my laptop night after night, watching this tidal wave of pain crash across my screen, stories written in lowercase letters with no punctuation, some written like diary entries, others clinical, as if emotional distance was the only way the author could speak at all, and every time I thought the same thing. He could have been any one of them. Richard hadn't just manipulated my mother and violated me emotionally, he'd constructed an entire identity built on control. But now that identity was crumbling, publicly, he'd faded into obscurity, hiding out in Michigan under a false narrative of retirement. But in private? That's where things started to unravel for him. At first, I ignored the signs. Then one afternoon, Kara called me, her voice laced with tension. He emailed me, she said. From a burner address. I checked the header. What did it say? She hesitated. He said he's going to correct the record. That too many people are believing a version of the story that paints him as a monster. He said we've gone too far. I didn't speak right away, because I knew what this was. Richard wasn't apologizing, he was circling. Men like him don't fade quietly, not without trying to regain the narrative. Control isn't just a preference to them. It's a lifeline. And when they lose it, they thrash. I think he's about to do something public, Kara added. Like what? Articles. Statements. Maybe something more. We agreed not to engage, but I still felt uneasy, especially when, a week later, one of our story submitters, a woman named Marcy, messaged the Daughter's Voice page. Hi. I don't know if this matters, but I saw your documentary. I recognize Richard. He tried to hire me as a paralegal in 2011. It never sat right. He asked me weirdly personal questions during the interview, like whether I was single or emotionally stable. Then he told me he sensed desperation, which meant I'd be easy to shape into a loyal assistant. I walked out. I messaged her privately and thanked her. Then I asked the question that had been creeping into my mind since Kara's call. Has he contacted you since the documentary? She responded instantly. Yes. He emailed me 2 nights ago. Said my name showed up in some comment section. Asked if I'd be willing to write a public statement about how professional and kind he was. He offered money. My stomach turned. This wasn't just Richard flailing. This was Richard trying to weaponize other women, again. To rewrite his image, I called Kara. We need to warn people, I said. I agree, she replied. But how? It wasn't as simple as posting another blog entry or going live. We'd spent months building trust, a space where survivors could speak without fear. If we began using it to air threats or respond to attackers, we'd erode that safety, but we couldn't stay silent either. So we did something different. We emailed every story submitter who had opted into updates and created a special bulletin. A gentle, clear message reminding them of their right to deny contact, to report coercion, and to remain anonymous if anyone ever tried to use their story without consent. We also embedded links to legal resources and organizations that supported survivors who faced retaliation or stalking, and then, quietly, we created a second portal, this one password protected, for verified contributors who had encountered Richard directly or indirectly, within 3 days. There were 16 entries to by the end of the week, 29. Each account corroborated what we already knew. He was reaching out, offering corrections, demanding retractions. threatening vague legal action he no longer had the credentials to pursue. Kara stared at the screen after we read the last entry. "This isn't just ego anymore," she said. "This is desperation." "He's unraveling," I said, "but he's still dangerous." We decided not to publish his name publicly, not again. Instead, we compiled the testimonies, timestamped everything, and sent the entire file to our legal advisor. Just in case. Still, the anxiety crept back. IT wasn't like before. It wasn't about fear that no one would believe me. Now, the fear was that even after the truth came out, the damage might not stop. Some nights, I couldn't sleep. Other nights, I dreamt that I was 13 again, standing at the bottom of the staircase in my mother's house while Richard smiled from the top. His arms crossed, calling me kiddo in that fake charming voice that felt like sandpaper on skin point one night. I woke up gasping, and I knew I had to go back to the house, the one Mom had finally sold after the divorce. It was still on the market, sitting empty, waiting for a buyer. She gave me the spare key. "I get it if you don't want to," she said. "But if you need to, close that chapter, I understand." So I went alone. IT was snowing lightly that day, just enough to dust the windowsills and blanket the neighborhood in white. I parked on the street and walked up the front steps with numb hands. The house was cold, unfurnished. Echoing, but familiar. I stepped into the living room. The fireplace where I'd hidden the recorder was empty now, the candle long gone. I looked at the staircase, the same one I used to avoid when Richard was home, timing my exits so I wouldn't have to pass him, and then I walked to the kitchen where I'd heard his voice for the first time through the vent. I stood there for a long time. Then, slowly, I opened my phone, and I played the recording again. Not for revenge, not for evidence, just to remind myself it was real. When the audio ended, I whispered to the air, "You don't live here anymore." Then I walked out and locked the door behind me. Back in the car, I texted Kara, went to the house, said goodbye. She responded instantly, "I'm proud of you. We're getting close. You can feel it, right?" I could, because people were listening, not just to us, to themselves. Our nonprofit had started reaching school districts, colleges, even a few corporate HR departments. They wanted workshops, trainings, materials. We were building something lasting, something bigger than Richard. But just as we began drafting our 5-year plan, the next twist came. Kara called, her voice shaking. He filed a lawsuit. My stomach dropped. For what? Defamation, emotional distress, loss of income. He's naming both of us. I closed my eyes. Of course, IT was the last card he had left to play. But this time we were ready. The official letter arrived in a manila envelope, its legal formatting sterile and cold, as if the weight of what it carried wasn't something personal or invasive, but merely transactional. I sat at my kitchen table staring at it, my fingers tracing the embossed return address of Richard's attorney, a mid-tier firm in Lansing known more for foreclosure management than high-profile cases. Still, the words inside made my stomach clench. Plaintiff, Richard Allen Whitmore. Defendants, Eliza Morgan and Kara Whitmore. Cause, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, tortious interference with prospective economic advantage. IT read like a poorly written revenge novel, one that confused justice with narrative control. Kara came over that night, pacing my living room barefoot, the legal envelope curled in her hand. "He actually did it," she muttered. "He really thinks he can rewrite reality in court." "He thinks it'll scare us," I said. "Will it?" I hesitated, then shook my head. No, because I'd been scared of Richard once. Of his smirking quiet. Of the way he could say 100 things with a single, patronizing glance. But I wasn't that girl anymore. And this lawsuit? It wasn't a weapon. IT was a confession. He had nothing left, no job, no reputation, no voice in the family. This wasn't about restoring his name. It was about punishing us for telling the truth. Our legal team, 2 brilliant women from a survivor-focused law nonprofit, reviewed the documents and smirked. "This is weak," said Janice, the lead attorney. "He's trying to use the courtroom like a therapy session." We'll file to dismiss. Still, we prepared for battle. They had us draft affidavits, compile our timeline, provide audio files, article drafts, emails, every scrap of proof we had from the very first recording to his creepy burner emails, trying to coerce statements from strangers. What shocked me most wasn't how angry he was. It was how careless. He'd included screenshots in his complaint that he had taken, messages he sent to former coworkers begging for character references, some of which read like unhinged monologues. These women are orchestrating a witch hunt. My stepdaughter was always emotionally unstable. Kara is brainwashed. Eliza seduced the media. He thought those screenshots helped his case. They helped ours more. During one of our prep meetings, Janice smiled at us across the table. You know, this isn't just about winning. It's about finishing. Kara nodded. We're tired of dragging his ghost around. Then let's bury him with receipts. We filed a countermotion, not just to dismiss his lawsuit, but to seek damages for harassment and emotional distress. It was risky, but it felt right. We were done being silent. And if Richard wanted a courtroom, we'd give him one. The hearing was set for early spring. Kara and I arrived in matching black suits, side by side. We didn't speak as we sat behind the desk, our lawyers flanking us like bodyguards. Richard was there too, older, thinner, bitterness carved into his face like erosion. He didn't look at us, just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, like he was holding in a monologue. His lawyer tried. She spoke in vague, condescending terms, claimed our statements had materially harmed Richard's life, that we had used selective storytelling to present a deeply biased narrative. She even tried to paint the recordings as misleading, arguing tone and context had been lost. Janice stood calmly, nodded, and then played the audio. I in the courtroom. Again, Richard's voice filled the space. Arrogant, unfiltered, she'll blame Eliza. She's always so damn protective of her. I'm just giving her a story she already half believes. The judge raised her eyebrows. Then came the emails, the threats, the screenshots. The room went cold. Janice finished by handing the judge a printed stack, a selection of anonymous submissions from daughter's voice, lightly redacted, each bearing chilling similarities to Richard's behavior. These women didn't know each other, she said. And yet, their stories read the same. This man has a pattern. What Ms. Morgan and Ms. Whitmore did wasn't defamatory. It was necessary. It was protective. And it was, above all, truthful. The judge ruled within 15 minutes. The motion to dismiss was granted. Our counterclaim was approved for review. Richard would not only walk away empty-handed, he'd now have to face the possibility of paying damages himself. Outside the courthouse, Kara and I stood beneath the gray sky, still silent. Then she laughed. Not loud, not triumphant. Just free. I never thought I'd see this day, she whispered. Me either. We hugged, a tight, tearful, healing hug, and let the courtroom fall behind us like ash in the wind. In the weeks that followed, everything accelerated. Daughter's voice received national press. We were invited to Washington to advise a committee on grooming prevention and mandatory reporting policy. School districts started requesting our materials. One state even contacted us about incorporating our work into a pilot curriculum for trauma-informed education. But the most powerful moment came during a public town hall in Stillwater, my hometown. They asked me to speak. It was surreal. Standing at a podium in the same community where Richard once sat on charity boards and shook hands at Sunday picnics, pretending to be something noble. I wore a simple navy dress. I looked out at the faces, familiar and new, and I told them the truth. I'm not here tonight as a victim, I began. I'm here as someone who stopped playing along. I told them how Richard wormed his way into my family, how he made me feel small, how he used shame and doubt like surgical tools, how he convinced everyone, even me, that I was just too sensitive. I told them about the audio, the confession, the silence that followed, and the fire that came after. When I finished, there was a long pause, and then, one by one, people stood, applauding, crying. Holding each other, it wasn't just for me, it was for themselves. For all the years they swallowed the words they were too scared to say. Later that night, a girl approached me, maybe 17, with wide eyes and trembling hands. She pressed a folded note into mine and whispered, "Thank you." Inside the note were two sentences, scrawled in messy handwriting. "He makes me feel sick when he hugs me." I thought I was the only one. I closed my eyes and exhaled. This was why we did it. Not for revenge, not for headlines, but for her, and girls like her, and the little girl I used to be standing in a kitchen full of noise, screaming silently into the void. We weren't silent anymore. We were building something louder than fear, and the echo would never stop. I used to think that once the worst was over, the exposure, the court battle, the humiliation of the man who'd tormented me, I'd be free. That truth, once revealed, would restore something. Maybe justice. Maybe peace. But freedom didn't arrive like a reward. It arrived like grief. Slow, confusing, brutal, because once the adrenaline fades, once the spotlight dims, you're left standing in the wreckage of what used to be your life, holding pieces of your identity that no longer fit. Who are you when you're no longer fighting every second to be believed? Who are you when the monster has been chased from the room? You're someone rebuilding from ashes. I didn't realize how much of my life had been shaped by Richard's presence, and not just his, but the entire structure that enabled him. The family dynamics, the silence, the way my mother used to flinch at conflict, the way I used to minimize myself to avoid tension. That system wasn't just broken, it had never been safe to begin with. It took losing everything that protected him for us to see the truth of ourselves, and why Mother was the first to admit it. She came over one afternoon with a box of photo albums. We sat at my dining table flipping through years of birthdays, vacations, school dances, all the smiling moments that now carried shadows. She stopped on a photo of me at 16. Prom night. I was standing by the stairs, alone in a lavender dress, fake smiling at the camera. "I didn't notice how tense you were," she said, voice cracking. "Not then. Not ever." I closed the album gently. "You didn't want to?" "No," she agreed. I didn't. She'd been going to therapy consistently since the divorce, and for the first time in my life, I saw her not just as a mother, but as a woman trying to heal the version of herself that had allowed Richard to take root in our lives. She apologized often now, not because she wanted forgiveness, but because she was finally willing to name her part in the damage. "People think guilt is a weakness," she said once. "But I think it's a doorway. You can walk through it. Or you can sit in it and rot." She was walking through it every day, but there were casualties. Some of our extended family distanced themselves quietly after the lawsuit, not because they believed Richard, but because truth made them uncomfortable. They preferred the version of our family that existed on holidays, in Facebook photos and wedding speeches. This new version, raw and exposed, didn't fit their narrative. One of my cousins messaged me a month after the court ruling. "I support you, but I wish you hadn't gone public." It's made things really tense with Mom and Dad. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Imagine how tense it was living it. They didn't reply. Not everyone wants truth. Some people just want quiet, but Kara and I were done being quiet. We'd been invited to speak at a national conference for survivor-led advocacy groups. The theme was restorative truth. We spent weeks preparing, not just slides, but stories. We weren't experts in law or psychology, but we were experts in survival and in learning how to rise without destroying ourselves in the process. Kara's portion focused on language, how abusers twist words, use ambiguity as a shield. Richard never said, "I'm hurting you," she told the audience. He said, "You're sensitive." He said, "I didn't mean it that way." He said, "I was just trying to help." And for years, I believed him. Because he never hit, never yelled. But silence is a weapon. And suggestion is a leash. My part focused on systemic failure, how people, teachers, pastors, family members had seen pieces of the truth and chosen not to look deeper. "Good men don't need alibis," I said into the microphone. "But predators always have them." They build reputations like fortresses, so when someone screams from inside, the world only hears wind. The standing ovation afterward didn't feel like triumph, it felt like solidarity. Later, at a networking dinner, a woman named Rochelle pulled us aside. She was in her late 50s, sharp-eyed, composed. She ran a small restorative justice program in Chicago and wanted to collaborate. "I've seen a lot of stories like yours," she said. "But the difference is, you didn't stop at survival. You built something." She offered us funding to expand Daughter's voice into 3 new cities. We accepted, but even as our work expanded, my personal life shrank. I'd started dating someone, a man named Theo. Kind, patient, unassuming. We met through a friend, and for the first few months, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: safety. But eventually, the ghosts came back. He'd reach for my hand too suddenly and I'd flinch. He'd surprise me with dinner and I'd spiral, wondering what I'd owe him. He told me I was beautiful one night and I froze, because Richard used to say that too. I tried to explain, "I know you're not him," I said. "But my body doesn't always know that." Theo nodded. "I don't need you to be perfect," he said. "I just need you to be real." And so I cried in front of him. I told him things I hadn't even told my therapist yet. And when I asked for space, he gave it. Not like a punishment, like a gift. It wasn't easy, but it was healing. And slowly, I started to believe that intimacy could exist without fear, that affection didn't have to be currency, that love, real love, was something you didn't have to earn through silence. And just when life started to feel steady, something new happened. Richard's name appeared in a headline, not because of another lawsuit, but because of an arrest, possession of unlicensed firearms. The article was short, just a local piece in a Michigan town's online bulletin. No mugshot, no salacious detail. But it was him. And it confirmed what we'd suspected. He was unraveling, spiraling into isolation and desperation. My mother texted me the link. I stared at it for a long time. Then closed the tab. I didn't feel triumphed. I didn't feel pitied. I just felt done. Because his name didn't belong in my life anymore. Only mine did. Only Kara's. Only my mother's. Only the names of the women we helped, the girls still learning to reclaim the sound of their own voices. That night, I wrote a letter. I didn't send it. I never would, but I needed to write it. "Dear Richard, you lost. Not because we exposed you. Not because we humiliated you. But because you built your life on control, and the second someone said no, your empire collapsed. You didn't lose your family. You never really had one. You had hostages. Now they're free, and you're just a footnote. I didn't destroy you. You did that all by yourself. I just stopped playing along." It's been a year since I played the recording at the family reunion. The night Richard's carefully constructed image collapsed in front of the very people he'd tried so hard to impress. A year since I turned pain into power and stepped out from the shadow he'd cast over my life for nearly 2 decades. It doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like aftermath, like standing on a beach after a storm, barefoot in wet sand. The sky finally clear, but the debris still scattered across the shore. There are days when I wake up with that same old ache in my chest, the one I used to get when I was 16 and walking past Richard in the hallway, praying he wouldn't touch me, wouldn't say something I couldn't prove, but couldn't forget. The ache is quieter now, but it's still there, because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning how to live beside the scars. The house is long gone. Mom moved to a small cottage on the edge of town, where she tends a garden and volunteers at a local center that supports women re-entering the workforce. Sometimes she sends me photos, her smiling with sun-streaked hair, hands in the soil, proud of a row of tomatoes or a blooming hydrangea. "I like who I am now," she told me recently, sipping iced tea on my balcony. "I used to think being good meant being silent. Now I think it means being brave." She looked at me then. "You taught me that." Kara is still my closest friend and more. We're not sisters by blood, but we're bonded in a way that biology can't touch. We still run Daughter's Voice together, which now has physical centers in 4 cities. Our latest campaign is focused on preventative education, training teens, teachers, and parents on the earliest warning signs of coercion, manipulation, and emotional abuse. One night, after a panel discussion at a high school, a boy approached us. He was maybe 16. Nervous. Pale. My girlfriend's stepdad makes her uncomfortable, he said. She told me, but she's afraid to say anything to her mom. I didn't know what to do until I heard you speak. We gave him resources, safety plans, a list of next steps. He thanked us, eyes wide with something that looked like hope, and in that moment I understood something I hadn't quite grasped before. Richard may have shattered a part of my life, but he didn't own the rest of it. And every time we helped someone else take back their voice, we chipped away at the power that predators like him rely on. Silenced. I've started writing again, not just speeches or op-eds, but something longer. A memoir, maybe. Or maybe just a journal for now. It begins with a sentence I never thought I'd have the courage to say. I believed him before I believed myself. Because that's where the real damage begins, not in the abuse itself, but in the way it teaches you to question your own instincts, your own worth, your own reality. But no more. I believe myself now. I believe Kara. I believe the girl who wrote on a folded piece of notebook paper. He makes me feel sick when he hugs me. I thought I was the only one. She wasn't. And because she spoke up, someone else won't have to feel alone. I haven't spoken to Richard since the court hearing. I never will again. But I still think about him, not with rage, not even with fear, but with the cold detachment you feel toward a storm long past. You remember the damage. You honor what it cost. But you don't beg the wind to come back. He lives in another state now. Alone. Disbarred. The last I heard, he was working at a small tax firm under someone else's name, still pretending to be more important than he is, and that's the difference between us. He spent his life creating illusions. I spent mine learning how to tell the truth. The reunion is happening again next month. Another family gathering, another potluck, another round of awkward hugs and recycled stories. This time, it's being hosted by my cousin Mark and his wife in a park downtown. Mom's going. Kara might join. And me, I haven't decided, not because I'm afraid, but because I'm free, and freedom means choosing not just what you'll say, but what you'll carry. I might go to. If I do, I'll bring my own dish, wear something simple, and smile when someone asks what I've been up to. I'll tell them we opened our 5th Survivor Center. I'll tell them about the school that added our curriculum. I'll tell them about the girl who now leads a teen support group after escaping her abusive stepfather. I'll tell them the truth, and if they look uncomfortable, that's not my burden anymore. That was never mine to carry. Theo's still in my life, somehow. After all the space and the hard conversations, we made it work. He never asked me to be lighter than I am. He just stood beside me while I figured out where I was broken, and when I needed silence, he didn't fill it, he honored it. He doesn't flinch when I have nightmares. He doesn't need to fix me. He just loves me, and that, more than anything, has helped me understand what safety actually feels like. I used to think revenge would make me feel powerful. But now I know power isn't in vengeance, it's in truth. I end choosing to live loudly in a world that once tried to erase you. I end knowing your worth doesn't depend on someone else's approval. I end saying, without apology, I was hurt. I was silenced. But I am not broken. People sometimes ask me if I'd do it all again, if I'd record the conversation, if I'd play it at the reunion, if I'd rip open a wound that had taken years to scar. My answer is always the same. Yes, because truth is messy. But silence is worse, and every girl who hears our story now knows something no one ever told me when I was a teenager. You don't owe anyone your silence just to make them comfortable. If you feel unsafe, speak. If you feel small, reach out. If they try to blame you for their choices, record the truth and let it speak for itself. You don't have to be polite. You just have to be brave. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if the whole world tells you to smile and stay quiet.